my name is Nishat Noor and welcome to Millennium Headlines. This week's top headlines are: pipe bomb at Marine Corps charity race rocks New Jersey town. 28 dead from China typhoon as new storm looms. Gunman kills 1, wounds 2 officers in bizarre Philly rampage. Syria charges U.S.-led attack on its forces. World leaders to tackle global menace of drug-resistant superbugs. President Obama's weekly address. Now the details to this week's top headlines. A pipe bomb-style device detonated in a garbage can at the start of a route of a Marine Corps charity race Saturday morning, injuring no one but sparking a massive law enforcement response and suspicious of terrorism. The device went off about 9:35 a.m. Eastern Time near the starting point of the Seaside Semper 5K, which had been scheduled to begin at 9:30 a.m., said Al Della Fave, spokesman for the Ocean County Prosecutor's Office. Problems with the registration for the race delayed the start and possibly spared people from injury, he said.
Part of the mystery of the bombs in New York City now answered. Police captured Ahmed Khan Rahami after an exchange of gunfire not far from his Elizabeth, New Jersey home, about 20 kilometers from where police suspect he planted a bomb in New York Saturday night that injured 29 people. The 28-year-old naturalized U.S. citizen from an Afghan family had been a criminal justice student before dropping out. A few hours earlier, the FBI raided his house in his neighborhood after police using a robot detonated a bomb found nearby. The FBI said they have evidence directly linking Rahami to similar bombs found elsewhere in New Jersey on Saturday, as well as another one in New York City Saturday night that failed to go off. The FBI, while saying the investigation is ongoing, cautioned there is no known terror cell operating in the city, which is already at heightened security as hundreds of world leaders are in town attending the UN General Assembly this week. The city's mayor, Bill de Blasio, nevertheless said the bombs were meant to cause serious damage and fatalities.
Based on the information we have now, we have every reason to believe this was an act of terror.
The attacks have raised the importance of national security on the campaign trail, Hillary Clinton seeking to reassure Americans.
This threat is real, but so is our resolve. Americans will not cower, we will prevail. We will defend our country, and we will defeat the evil, twisted ideology of the terrorists.
But her opponent, Donald Trump, used the fact Rahami was born overseas to criticize U.S. immigration policy.
Immigration security is national security. My opponent has the most open borders policy of anyone ever to seek the presidency.
It was ultimately surveillance video captured here on 23rd Street in the Chelsea neighborhood where the bomb went off that led investigators to identify Rahami as the main suspect. Now that he's in custody, the investigation takes a new turn. First, the FBI wants to know his motivations and also if he had any help along the way.
The investigation is moving rapidly, and as is my practice, I'm going to leave it to the FBI and law enforcement to provide details. If you see something suspicious, then you need to say something. Contact local law enforcement. Meanwhile, while all this is going on in New York and New Jersey, we're also focused on the stabbing attack at the shopping mall in Minnesota. At this point, we see no connection between that incident and what happened here in New York and New Jersey. The FBI is investigating the Minnesota incident as a potential act of terrorism. Neither individuals nor organizations like ISIL can ultimately undermine our way of life. That's the kind of strength that makes me so proud to be an American. And by showing those who want to do us harm that they will never beat us, by showing the entire world that as Americans we do not and never will give in to fear. That's going to be the most important ingredient in us defeating those who would carry out terrorist acts against us.
Still reeling from a typhoon that left at least 28 people dead, Chinese authorities on Saturday warned of high waves and strong winds from a new storm, Malacas, that was bearing down on the east coast of Chinese mainland after skirting Taiwan. China's National Marine Environmental Forecasting Center warned of waves as high as 40 feet off Taiwan's east coast and southern central parts of the East China Sea, and 14-foot ones off the coastal regions of Zhejiang and Fujian provinces, the official Xinhua news agency reported. As the storm approached, forecasters raised the alert level to orange, the second highest level. Earlier this week, Typhoon Meranti, the strongest storm to hit China this year, lashed a wide swath of the country's coastal areas, including Shanghai, with heavy rain and winds up to 175 miles per hour. It struck Xiamen City in Fujian province Thursday morning. Fujian flood control authorities said 18 people died and 11 others were missing. 10 died and 4 were missing in neighboring Zhejiang province, Xinhua reported. More than 900 hours collapsed in Zhejiang alone as high winds and heavy rain slammed the area. The news agency said Meranti paralyzed several cities in southern Fujian province, including Xiamen, Kuzhou, and Zhangjiao. China's National Marine Environmental Forecasting Center warned ships to stay clear of coastal regions in Fujian, Guangdong, and Shanghai. China's State Flood Control and Drought Relief Headquarters also activated an emergency response to cope with Malacas. By Saturday morning, Taiwan local time, 2,658 people have been evacuated from New Taipei City, Taoyuan City, Yilan County, and Hualien County, according to the Central Emergency Operations Center, the Central News Agency reported. Taiwan Railways Administration suspended all services on its Pingji Line and Shenhua Line on Saturday, as well as services on its North Link Line and Yilan Line around the northeastern part of Taiwan. Malacas will likely decrease in power as it moves northeast from Taiwan and China, but intensify again into the equivalent of a Category 4 hurricane before reaching Honguni on Wednesday, according to AccuWeather.com. Philadelphia's police commissioner said Saturday that 25-year-old gunman who killed a civilian and injured 2 police officers before he was shot and killed by police had left behind an angry, rambling note that showed he was hell-bent on hurting a lot of people. The gunman, identified as a Nicholas Gallant, had an extensive police record and in the note ranted against his probation officer and police commissioner Richard Ross Jr., told reporters Saturday afternoon. Ross said Gallant began his shooting spree by firing repeatedly into a police car as Sergeant Sylvia Young, hitting her in the arm and sending several bullets into her protective vest. Although Gallant apparently did not know Young, he was clearly trying to assassinate her, Ross said. Young and the second officer, Ed Miller, who works for the University of Pennsylvania Police Force, were injured by gunfire during the shooting rampage, but were alert and in stable condition on Saturday. The commissioner said there was no indication that the gunman had been radicalized or was working with anyone else. He said he appeared to have mental health issues and was clearly angry at his probation officer. He carried out one of the most violent acts in Philly in a long time, Ross said. Ross called the violent eruption surreal as the gunman attacked Young, fired into a bar 5 times, used a woman briefly in a shield before shooting her in the leg, and then fired 14 times into a passing vehicle, wounding one man in the chest and killing a 25-year-old woman inside. The gunman was eventually chased into an alley where he exchanged gunfire with police, hitting Miller before he was killed. Ross said officers found a rambling note at the scene in an envelope marked "Doomed," as well as a plastic bag carrying 3 magazine rounds and more than a dozen live rounds of ammunition. The note expressed hatred toward law enforcement and named a probation officer. This rambling suggests that he clearly was not trying to target a police officer as he did. So it just kind of makes it very clear to us what was out there to do, Ross said. Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney praised the officer and pleaded with officers to follow Young's example of wearing protective vests. "Thank you for what you do for us every day, and please, 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 every shift, please wear your vest," he said. "They will save your life, as we saw tonight." The Syrian military charged Saturday that U.S.-led coalition aircraft had struck a Syrian army base in an attack that the Russian Defense Ministry said killed 62 Syrians. The U.S. military said late Saturday that the coalition had halted an air raid against the Islamic State group in eastern Syria after being told by Russia that it might have struck Syrian state and government forces. The Syrian General Command in its statement called the purported attack on the Syrian Arab army a serious and blatant aggression against Syria and its army, the Syrian Arab news agency reported.
Now, the U.S.-led coalition has bombed Syrian army's positions near the eastern city of Deir ez-Zor. The attack targeted a military airport at the vicinity of the Tharda mountain. Now, according to the so-called Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, at least 83 soldiers have been killed and over 120 wounded in the airstrikes. The Russian Defense Ministry has put the death toll at over 60. Spokesman Igor Konashenkov said the U.S. will be responsible if the current ceasefire breaks down. He said if coalition bombing of Syrian army is a mistake, it's evidence of stubborn U.S. refusal to coordinate its actions in Syria with Russia. And Moscow said that ISIL had immediately gone on the offensive after the strikes to take control of the area. The Syrian government has condemned the raid, calling it, quote, conclusive evidence about the support of the United States and its allies for Daesh terrorists. U.S.-led coalition is yet to comment on the raid that came amid a fragile ceasefire in Syria.
Global health experts are so alarmed by the threat of the superbugs that the United Nations will convince heads of state to tackle the health problem, a state so extreme it's happened just 3 times before. World leaders will gather on Wednesday with doctors and other experts for a high-level meeting to discuss the root of the problem: antimicrobial resistance. At the UN General Assembly, they're expected to adopt a political declaration that would then go to the full assembly to be adopted as a resolution. The only other health issues to prompt similar action were HIV, Ebola, and non-communicable diseases.
Global health experts are so alarmed by the threat of superbugs that the UN will convene heads of state to tackle the health problem. A step so extreme, it's happened just 3 times before.
We're losing the ability to treat infections. Basically, the infections out there are becoming resistant to antimicrobial drugs, antibiotics that we use to cure people. It has now been projected that by the year 2050, which is not so far away, we will have more people die from antibiotic-resistant infections than die currently from cancer. It's a really sort of surprising comparison, but this means on the order of about 10 million people per year dying from infections that because they can't be treated anymore.
Now, superbugs threaten to plunge the world into a dangerous post-antibiotic era in which germs we've long been able to control become deadly. Antimicrobial resistance Happens when bacteria, viruses, and other microorganisms mutate after being exposed to drugs such as antibiotics or antiviral medications, and those medicines grow less effective over time.
For decades, we simply have not been making new antibiotics. For companies, it has become economically unattractive to be making antibiotics, and so they'll focus on making other classes of medicines which are used on a long-term basis. Antibiotics, if people get better, are just going to be used for short periods of time, and so companies have really lost the incentives to make these medicines, and so we somehow have to find a way to make this attractive again for the private sector to come back. This is a profound danger to people around the world. It's something which is going to kill a lot of people. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to endanger our ability to take care of people in health systems. It's going to endanger our ability to sustain our food supply, and it's going to really endanger our ability to continue development in the world. It's a surprise to people, but in fact our modern approaches to agriculture, our ability to sustain food and protein depend on having antibiotics which can cure illnesses in animals like in people. So it's very much a threat to our food supply.
In this week's address, President Obama called on Republicans in Congress to do their jobs. With Congress back in session, there is a lot of business that needs to get done, including funding the fight against Zika, providing resources to help the flood victims in Louisiana, and giving Supreme Court nominee Chief Judge Merrick Garland the courtesy of a fair hearing and a vote. The president said addressing these problems is all within our reach, and we need Congress to work as hard as the American people do. We should expect Republicans in Congress to do their jobs, to protect us from disease, help us recover from disaster, and keep the Supreme Court above politics.
I've delivered a few hundred of these weekly addresses over the years, and you may have noticed a theme that pops up pretty often. The Republicans who run this Congress aren't doing their jobs. And guess what? Congress recently returned from a 7-week vacation, and they've only got 2 weeks left until their next one. But there's a lot of business they need to get done first. First, even as we're seeing more and more Zika cases inside the United States, they've refused to fund our efforts to protect women and children by fighting Zika in a serious way. Second, they still need to provide resources to help the people of Louisiana recover from last month's terrible floods, and to help communities like Flint recover from their own challenges. Third, they have made Merrick Garland, a Supreme Court nominee with more federal judicial experience than any other in history, wait longer than any other in history for the simple courtesy of a hearing, let alone a vote, all because they want their nominee for president to fill that seat. And there are plenty of other bipartisan priorities they should finish this year as well. Passing criminal justice reform, attacking the opioids epidemic, funding Joe Biden's cancer moonshot, finishing a trans-Pacific trade agreement that will support American jobs and boost American wages, and passing a budget that will make sure all of America's priorities are funded without resorting to shutdown threats and last-minute gimmicks. And none of this list even includes some other big priorities that should get done. It's been almost a decade, for example, since Congress voted to raise the minimum wage. None of these things should be controversial. All of it is within our reach. This is America. We can do anything. We just need a Congress that works as hard as you do. At the very least, we should expect that they should do their jobs and protect us from disease, help us recover from disaster, keep the Supreme Court above politics, and help our businesses grow and hire. So, if any of these priorities matter to you, let your congressperson know. And if they still refuse to do their jobs, well, you know what to do in November. Our government only works as well as the people we elect, and that's entirely up to you. Thanks, everybody, and have a great weekend.
Pipe bomb at Marine Corps charity race rocks New Jersey town. 28 dead from China typhoon as new storm looms. Gunman kills 1, wounds 2 officers in bizarre Philly rampage. Syria charges U.S.-led attack on its forces. World leaders to tackle global menace of drug-resistant superbugs. President Obama's weekly address. Thank you for watching Millennium Headlines. This has been Nishat Noor. See you next week.